When I think back on my childhood and youth, growing up on a farm, it seemed that life was very short. And that youth aren't supposed to be thinking about death because they always think they have eternal life. I often thought about what's going to happen after that. You know, why am I here? Where am I going to? And I think it was questions like that that brought me to Marino. My name is Mary Mel Herrick. I'm a Marino sister, have been for the last 55 years.
Well, Mary is from Minnesota, and she has spent, I think, all her missionary life in Latin America and Central America.
And I've had the wonderful opportunity of working in Mexico, in Guatemala, and in Bolivia.
Well, I think she's rather a quiet person, but I think extremely dedicated.
I was teaching English and religion even before I knew how to speak Spanish well. I was unhappy after a while at the school because I felt as if I came to Marino to work with the poor, and there I was not working with the poor. I was working with the upper class women of that city. I don't like to call it a civil war because for me it was more just a simple repression by the powers that be. It was aimed at the poor, the majority who are the indigenous of Guatemala, those who have cared for the land over centuries, and the land has come down through their ancestors for centuries, and it's beginning to be valuable for minerals and for wood. And so the best thing as far as the powerful are concerned is to just get rid of the indigenous. There were great sweeps of killings. There were disappearances of key people who were leaders among the indigenous people who had been trained to be teachers or doctors would disappear, would be tortured, would be brainwashed and put back on the television to say how they had been mistaken and that they were really with powers that be. Things that we knew were brought about just by torture. And then the saddest thing about all of that was that my own country had intervened in 1954 to overturn a government that was dedicated to land reform and helping the poor. I was convinced that my country was doing good all over the world and that we were somebody to be looked up to. And little by little I learned that history, and I learned the present day involvement of the military, that our people were being trained here. The military of Guatemala were being trained to torture. And since that time, there has been no president that has cared anything about the poor and tried to help them. The first awakening I had was when the newspaper reported, the radio, that the indigenous people from a village in the Verapazes were called in supposedly to receive the titles to their little lands, their small parcels of land. And the army opened fire on them and killed truckloads of them. I saw the pictures in the paper of bodies stacked high. And that was the first awareness I had that something is really wrong here. Something is terribly unjust. And then it began to worsen for us. People that we knew, people that were working with groups, working with organizations, justice, were being captured and tortured. And a friend of ours who had worked with Mary Knoll right there in Huehuetenango was shot he was called out of his office at the top of the stairs, and he was just shot point blank there. And there was nowhere to appeal. There was nowhere to look for help, because it was the government and it was the military working for the government that were doing these things to the poor.